They weren't criminals, just two sisters trying to survive, working double shifts and raising a child in a country they called home. But one ordinary afternoon, flashing lights turned their lives into a nightmare. Accused of a crime they didn't commit, they found themselves handcuffed, silenced, and facing deportation. No evidence, no mercy, just assumptions and the color of their skin. What happens when innocence isn't enough to prove you belong? Jada and Maya were sisters bound by struggle and survival. Living in a small apartment in Florida, they worked long shifts cleaning offices and stocking store shelves, sending what little they could back home to help their mother. Life wasn't easy, but they were proud of what they'd built. Modest, honest, and theirs. Every morning began before sunrise, and every night ended with exhaustion. Yet even through the fatigue, they believed that if they kept their heads down and worked hard, things would get better. But in America, hard work doesn't always protect you, especially when your skin color and your accent draw judgment before your words do. The sisters knew that unspoken truth all too well. They had seen it in landlords who demanded extra deposits, just in case, in store clerks who watched them like thieves, in neighbors who smiled with suspicion instead of warmth. Still, they carried on, refusing to let prejudice define them. Jada was the older one, steady, strong, protective. Maya was more outspoken, never afraid to question why the world treated them differently. They leaned on each other through every struggle, every insult, every paycheck stretched to its last dollar. That Sunday afternoon was supposed to be simple. Errands, groceries, a rare treat of new clothes for Maya's son. The sun was bright, the air warm, and for a few hours, life felt normal. But normal doesn't last long when the system is built to see guilt before innocence. Because within minutes of stepping inside that store, the sisters' ordinary day would spiral into a nightmare that would test their faith, their freedom, and their right to simply exist. The Burlington store was busy that afternoon. Families shopping, music playing softly through the speakers, the kind of noise that made everyone blend together. But to the two sisters, it was just another errand before heading home. Maya pushed the cart, humming softly, while Jada browsed through the clearance racks, searching for school clothes for Maya's little boy. It should have been an ordinary moment. Then she felt it. The eyes. A security guard had been watching them since they walked in. At first, Jada ignored it. She'd felt that stare before. The quiet suspicion that followed her into every store, every neighborhood. But when she turned down the next aisle, she noticed another man with a badge on his belt, pretending to browse while speaking into a small radio. Her stomach sank. Within minutes, the energy around them changed. Whispers from employees, glances exchanged near the registers. Maya didn't notice until they reached the checkout line, where two police officers stood by the door. Their uniforms gleamed under the fluorescent lights, hands resting near their holsters. When Jada tried to pay, one officer stepped forward. His voice was sharp, controlled, too familiar in its authority. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." No explanation, no reason, just that cold tone that made the world around her shrink. Maya looked confused, still clutching her shopping bag. "What's going on?" she asked, but the officer didn't respond. Instead, he motioned to the second cop, who moved toward her sister. Within seconds, Maya's wrists were pulled behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking was louder than the music, louder than her heartbeat. Shoppers stopped. Some whispered. A few took out their phones. Jada tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "What did we do?" she finally managed to say. No answer. Just that same rehearsed silence of men who had already decided guilt before hearing a word. They were escorted outside, under the burning Florida sun, surrounded by flashing lights and curious onlookers. Bags of unpaid merchandise were spread across the hood of their car. Items the officers claimed were stolen. But Jada remembered paying. She remembered scanning each tag. Yet the receipts had somehow vanished. At the station, things got worse. The sisters were separated, questioned for hours in rooms that smelled like bleach and fear. No lawyer, no translator, just accusations. The officers spoke over them, twisting their words, turning confusion into confession. Their calm voices carried that same arrogance that came with power unchecked. When Jada asked for a phone call, she was told, "Immigration's already been notified." The words hit like a punch. Immigration, as if their entire existence could be erased by a phone call. That night, Jada sat alone in the holding cell, the sound of keys jingling echoing down the hallway. She thought about Maya, her little sister who always believed in fairness, who always said America was better than this. But now, even she would have to see the truth. In this system, innocence doesn't matter when your skin isn't the right color. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky, as if the heavens themselves were preparing for what was coming next. Because by morning, this wouldn't just be another arrest. It would become a fight for their freedom, their dignity, and the right to call this country home. The steel doors slammed behind them with a finality that sent chills down Jada's spine. The detention center was cold, fluorescent, and silent in the worst way, like a place where hope came to die. She hadn't seen Maya in nearly 24 hours. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs, and the bruises on her arm were dark reminders of how quickly routine questioning had turned into force. She sat on the edge of a metal bench, staring at the wall where a cracked sign read, "Detainees must remain calm." The irony was cruel. Calm was impossible when you'd just been told you were being deported to a country you hadn't seen since childhood. A guard entered, his tone emotionless, as he read out names for transfer. Jada's wasn't among them, but Maya's was. Her sister appeared moments later, eyes swollen from crying, clutching the small brown envelope that held everything she was allowed to keep. Their eyes met through the bars, separated by a wall of indifference. "They're taking me today," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. Jada reached out, but her hand met cold metal. The officers didn't pause. They didn't care. To them, this was just paperwork. Another body on the list. Jada begged to speak, to prove their innocence, to show the receipts that vanished somewhere between the store and the cell. But her words fell into the void. The officer just tightened his grip on Maya's arm and said, "ICE's orders, not my problem." That was the moment something inside Jada broke. Not from fear, but from fury. She realized that silence had protected no one. Her family, her dignity, her sister's future. Everything was slipping away. Not because of crime, but because of color, accent, and assumptions. As the transport van doors shut behind Maya, Jada screamed. Not words, but the sound of someone who finally understood what injustice truly costs. The guards turned away, pretending not to hear. But one woman down the hall, a volunteer lawyer, did. She lifted her head, recognizing that cry for what it was, the sound of a fight that wasn't over yet. Days turned into weeks, but Jada refused to give up. That lawyer who had heard her cries came back the next morning with determination in her eyes and a folder in her hands. She had seen this story before. Innocent women of color detained, accused, and silenced under the weight of a broken system. This time, she refused to let it happen again. With her help, Jada filed an emergency appeal. The missing receipts were found, misplaced in the police evidence locker, never logged, never reviewed. The store's cameras showed exactly what Jada had claimed. They had paid for everything. What the officers called theft was nothing more than racial profiling, an assumption that two women who didn't look like they belonged must have done something wrong. Within days, Maya's deportation was halted. The ICE van never made it to the airport. Instead, she was returned to the detention center, where she and Jada embraced through tears and disbelief. Their story spread quickly, first through local news, then across social media. Hashtags called for justice, for reform, for accountability. People who had never met them saw their faces and recognized their own fears reflected back. A month later, all charges were dropped. The county sheriff's office issued a formal apology that sounded hollow and rehearsed, but it didn't matter. The sisters were free. They had survived the kind of injustice that destroys so many others. But survival came with scars. Jada and Maya didn't fade quietly into normal life. They joined advocacy groups, speaking publicly about racial profiling and the silent cruelty of the immigration system. Their story became a rallying cry, a reminder that innocence should never have to prove itself. Because in a country built on freedom, they had nearly lost theirs for simply existing. And maybe that's the hardest truth to face. How many more sisters, brothers, mothers, and fathers will have to fight to be seen as human before change finally comes? Don't miss more powerful real-life stories. Hit subscribe now.